Last time we've learned how to install Git on your computer. And now we can start working. In this video I'll explain how to set up local and remote repositories. So subscribe to our channel and let's go! Hi, I'm Alex. Welcome to the next episode of Railsware Academy Git series. If you missed the previous episode, click the card above and learn how to install and configure Git from the outset. Today we will dive deeper and learn how to set up local and remote repositories in Git. A repository or repo is a basic building block in Git. It represents a folder which contains a project's code. Git allows you to set up both local and remote repos. And now let's learn how to create each of them. When it comes to local Git repositories, there are two ways you can get one on your computer. Let's launch Terminal or any other command line tool you might be using, and create our project directory for which we are going to track changes. Next, let's cd into that directory. Cd stands for Change Directory. You can navigate between directories with this command. Once we are there, let's run git init command. This initializes a new Git repository. What Git does here is that it creates a .git directory containing all the data needed to manage your local repository as well as information about the remote repository. Another way to set up local repository is to clone existing remote or local repository using the git clone command. In this case, you do not initialize repo from scratch, but get local copy of an existing one. For instance, we can clone our example repo from Railsware Academy account on GitHub. Just copy remote repository URL and then back in your terminal type git clone and paste the URL. After Git finished cloning all the files, we can now cd into newly created directory. As we can see, it also includes .git directory with all Git related stuff. If you ever want to stop tracking your entire project with Git, you simply need to remove .git directory using rm command. Type rm-rf.git and hit enter. Now your project folder is no longer a Git repository. Okay, at this point you might have a question. How did this remote repository get created? Remote repositories are basically the same as local repositories, but located on a shared server, which is usually referred to as origin. We are going to use GitHub to create remote repository, so that later we could commit changed files and push them to that repo. You need to be signed in on GitHub. Then you'll be able to create new repository by clicking this green button. Let's give this repository a name, like Getting Started, and click Create. As a result, we see an empty repo with an origin URL, which we can use to bind our local repo to remote origin. To demonstrate this, I'll switch to newly initialized local repository, and I need to assign reference to a remote repo. Let's copy the repository URL and run git remote add origin and repo URL. After this, we can check edit remote repos with the command git remote-v. Now our origin is set to remote repo and we can start pushing our commits to GitHub. But before that, we need to discuss one more important topic related to repositories: ignoring files. There might be such cases when you do not want some files to be tracked with Git. For instance, personal environment settings, which are not for sharing with the team. You would probably don't want that to be pushed to remote repository. So we need to tell Git which files you don't want to track. Let's create .end.local file in your root directory. Let's run git status command. We can see that Git identified this file as newly created file and it is going to track it. We need to make this file ignorable so that it never gets tracked, committed, and pushed to a remote repository. For this, we need to create a .gitignore file, which will contain all the files and directories to be ignored by Git. Simply run touch.gitignore, and now we can open this file in a text editor. Here we can add a list of files and directories, each starting with a new line, for Git to ignore. Each line can also contain wildcard names. For instance, we can ignore one specific file, or ignore all files in a specific folder, using asterisk. Or we can even ignore all files of a certain type. For example, asterisk.rb indicates that Git will ignore all Ruby files in this directory, no matter how you name them. Let's add our .end.local file to the list. Mac users will likely want to add .dsstore file to gitignore. It is a file that gets created each time you visit a directory using Finder. So feel free to make it ignorable as well. Once we've added all files we need to gitignore file, let's go back to terminal and run git status command again to see what has been changed. We no longer see our .end file, but the gitignore file appeared in the list of untracked files. Git-ignore file itself must be committed and pushed to a remote repo, and it also can be updated anytime later. So your repositories have been set up and you can stage and commit first changes. And that's what we are going to explain in the next video. Next time we will talk more about making changes and committing them. Press like if you find this video helpful and subscribe to our channel not to miss more interesting Git skills. See you soon!